All right, hopefully you enjoyed all those videos that illustrated those principles of visual capture. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about something that doesn't get really covered in our textbook very much, but I kind of agree with it not being in there because a lot of the research in this area has been discovered to be falsified data, which is not a good look. But the ones I'm going to talk about are ones that have been replicated and seem to be actual outcomes. So embodied perception refers to our tendency to use our body's current state as information for how we perceive the world. So for example, when we're tired, we tend to overestimate the slant of a hill that we've been assigned to climb. Like we'll think that's a steeper grade when we're tired than when we're not tired. So we're using our body as information for making this judgment that has nothing to do with how tired you are. You are just asked how steep is this hill in front of you, and you're supposed to use a little tool to sort of match the angle of the hill, and people tend to make a steeper angle when they're tired than when they are not. When you're in pain, you overestimate how far it will be. Like if your knee hurts and I say, okay, well, you just got to get up to that corner. How far away do you think that corner is? You tend to overestimate the distance when you're in pain than relative to when you're not in pain. When you're not in pain, you tend to be more accurate. When holding a heavy object, people tend to judge the value of different currencies as higher. So if you tell them that the baseline is the US dollar, and then you say, how much is a yen worth? How much is a euro worth? And so on. People who are holding heavier clipboards tend to overestimate the value of the currencies relative to people who are holding just a regular unweighted clipboard. So having a heavy thing in your hand makes you think that this currency is heavier, so to speak, right? And then finally, people tend to judge a target to be larger when it's an easy shot, like there's nothing obstructing their view of the target, or it's a target that is, what's the word I'm looking for? I love it when I blank on super easy vocabulary words. So easy could be unobscured, easy could be actual distance. So if it's closer to you, you think it's not only closer to you, but it's also a larger target than it really is. And so these are some examples of how your body and its state can make you, can serve as information when you're making judgments. That's basically the premise. Now, like I said, people really jumped on this embodied perception bandwagon about, I'd say 20 years ago, and a bunch of research came out that a lot of it turned out to have been falsified. I'll give you an example of one that got falsified. They did a study where the person was either standing on the stage or they were standing in the orchestra pit. So they were either up high or they were down low. And then the person that they were working with was either above them on the stage or below them in the orchestra pit. So they were always in opposition positions, right? People who were in the higher position, who had an opportunity to dole out a dose of Tabasco as a punishment for a wrong answer to the other person, when they were on the stage and the other person who was going to get the Tabasco was in the orchestra pit, it was reported that they doled out a larger dose of Tabasco than when the person who's doling the Tabasco was in the orchestra pit and they were doling it out to the person on the stage. And the researchers' inference was, oh, well, when you're feeling higher than the other person, then you feel like they deserve to be punished. Well, it turned out that their data was falsified. The data, people noticed that there was too much consistency and it looked like some of the numbers had been faked, and nobody's been able to replicate it. And so it's just an example of like people thought, ooh, a lot of our judgments are probably affected by these kinds of things. And I apparently believed it so much that they faked data. So I'm only reporting those that have been replicated and well established. All right, let's wrap up this chapter with a little conversation on depth perception. All right, so there are two ways that you're able to detect how far away something is from you. Binocular cues rely on the fact that you have two eyes. Bi means two, Ocular means eyes. So you have two eyes and they're on the front of your face. They're not on the side like a deer or a cow. They're in the front like a predator, right? So binocular cues are cues that rely on that fact that your eyes are in the front of your head and can look at the same object at the same time. All right, so here we have your L is the left eye and R is the right eye. We have an object in the front of us. Convergence refers to how much your eyes have to turn toward each other in order to keep that object in focus. So something that's closer to your face, and you can test this while we're talking, you can hold your index finger in front of your face, bring it closer and try and fixate. As you're bringing it closer to your face, you'll feel your eyes rotating towards each other, right? As you move it farther away out to arm's distance, your eyes will get straighter in their sockets. So that's a measure of convergence, how much those eyes have to converge on each other in order to maintain that object in the visual field. And so things that are closer together have more, things that are closer to our faces have more convergence. Things that are farther away have less convergence. And it's a muscle cue. It's a cue that the brain collects from those ocular muscles that position your eyes in the socket. So the brain collects that information about how much each of those muscles is straining and comes to a conclusion about how much the eyes are rotating toward each other. So we have convergence, and then the other binocular cue is called retinal disparity. I happen to have found another diagram that used the Space Needle, so I thought that was fun. So retinal disparity refers to how different the object looks to the two eyes. In fact, in the top panel, they give us a picture in those lower left images of the cube. The right eye is basically seeing a flat side of the cube, whereas the left eye is seeing an angle on the cube. That's retinal disparity. Those two eyes are seeing two different things, right? And then we have this diagram on the bottom where you see as the eyes have to look at that apple, they're turned in more, so they're going to be seeing slightly different angles on that apple. The farther away tree, okay, they're a little bit straighter in their sockets, so the tree is going to look more similar to the two eyes. And then the Space Needle is so far away that those eyes are basically straight in the socket, and the image cast on each of those retinas is going to be identical. The more different the two images are, the more your brain concludes that the object must be close to your face. The more similar the two images on your retina are, the farther away the brain assumes the object is. So if you have eyes that are rotating toward each other, they're converging on each other, and there's a lot of retinal disparity, the object looks different to each eye, your brain says that is an object that's close. If your eyes are relatively straight in the socket, the muscles aren't straining at all to try and rotate towards each other, minimal convergence, and the retinal images are very similar, the brain's going to say that's farther away. Now this is not going to be great, perfect, once we get out of probably about 6 to 10 feet. As an object gets farther away from our face, there's going to be less convergence, less retinal disparity, and so these binocular cues are not going to be super helpful for depth. Once you get out probably 6 to 10 feet, you start to lose the position of your eyes as a good piece of information, and the difference in the retinal images. So luckily we have other cues that we can rely on. These are what we call monocular cues. So monocular cues are going to give us information about depth even if we only have one eye, or maybe we have two eyes that don't really rotate towards each other, right? Some people's eyes are not straight in their sockets, and so they have a lot of monocular cues that guide their depth. These are also cues that are really important in like art, right? Because you're working in 2 dimensions. You don't have 3 dimensions to work in, and so we have to convey distance using these kinds of monocular cues. So I have a nice image here on the screen, and we're going to use it to illustrate the different monocular cues. All right, so the first one I wanted to mention is what's called relative size. Things that are closer to us will look larger than their same size, comparisons. Like let's use the lines on the road. You know that those lines are all the same size because that's what they do, right? They make the same size lines throughout a road like that. So those lines are exactly the same size in reality, but the one that's closest to us looks bigger than the one behind it, and certainly bigger than the one behind that. and definitely bigger as they start becoming just basically dots as they're going off into the distance. And then they aren't even visible as it goes on. That's what we mean by relative size. Things that are closer to us will look bigger than things that are farther away from us. I took these little fence posts that are along the road, and I put lines over each of them that matched the length of the fence post, and then I lined them up here for you to see that the ones that are, see, now this is a picture, so even though we all know that those fence posts are all the same size, what I've done is I've drawn a line over how they appear, right? And so you can see the ones that are the farthest away turned out to be those little tiny dashes, and the ones that are closer to us are the ones that are longer. Whoops, that's not the way I wanted to go. So there's my little fence post, and they look reasonably normal. It is freakishly difficult to get those lines to be the length you want. Freakishly hard, but I tried. And so you see them off in the distance. You're assuming that they're the same height because they're fence posts. And then when you bring them down here, you go, okay, yeah, the ones that are the farthest away are clearly smaller. And that's a relative size cue. Then we have texture gradient. If you look at the asphalt, you can see a little bit of, the rocks and a little bit of the, aggregate that's in there. But if you go farther back, it's just sort of, you've lost all that texture. You can maybe see that the middle of the lane is a little lighter than where the tires tend to run, but it's not about texture as much as just a little bit of shadowing, right? So yeah, you lose the texture as it goes off into the distance. Relative height. Okay, so I've circled that first dash in the street. The one that's farther from us is higher in the screen, isn't it? Even though this is probably a pretty flat road. Sometimes students say to me, oh, well, that's how we do it in pictures, but that's not how the real world looks. Well, this is exactly how the real world looks. Look out your window. Look at the floor in the room that you're sitting in. The floor that's farther away from you will look higher up than the floor that's directly at your feet. Right? You have to look down to see what's directly at your feet. You have to look up a little bit to see the floor in the distance. So it is how exactly the world is. Things that are higher up in the visual field tend to be farther away. Now, this is not perfect, is it? Because there might be something very close to you that is hanging above your head and you have to look up. So obviously it's not perfect like that. I'm talking about if you're looking out into the visual field, your brain will assume that things that are higher up in the visual field are probably farther away. Relative brightness. Let's again look at this dash in the front, and it's relatively bright. You can see it's yellow. Yeah, it's dirty, but you can tell that it's a amber or whatever brighter shade. And as you go back, okay, it's not about the dirtiness. It's about the fact that it's not bright enough for us to really detect it anymore. They get progressively less bright as they go off into the distance. Linear perspective. So let's take these sides of the road. Right? Now, they already had a line on them, right? You got these white lines, but I wanted to go ahead and draw the red lines over top because when you take the background away, you really see that, oh my gosh, there's a lot of those parallel lines. We all know that the side of a road is parallel to the other side of the road to the best that, the constructors can do. And so you've got these parallel sides of the road that as they go off into the distance, they seem to come together. Right, that's called linear perspective, and without all the context, you see those are really coming together. It almost feels a little bit less dramatic of a sharp line in this picture, and then when I take away the picture, it's like, oh my gosh, they're really coming together. So that's linear perspective. That those parallel lines tend to come together in the distance. So let's look at this picture again, and I put some new objects in it for fun, and let's look at those rectangles. So we've got relative size. Okay, now that one's kind of messed up because doesn't the one in the back doesn't the one that's higher up look bigger? Right? Well, now why would that be if it's higher up in the field so we know it's farther away? There's no texture gradient cue. They're both the same. Relative brightness, technically they're the same. I literally just copied the rectangle, but doesn't the one on the top look a little darker? Or is that just me? The one on the top looks a little darker to me, but they are in fact the same. I just copied them. The linear perspective of the road helps to support our interpretation that the one that's higher up in the field is farther away because it's filling up more of the road than the one at the bottom is filling. right? And we know that the road comes together in the distance. So if these objects were the same size let's say they were in this actual picture, not something I put over top, but like were present in the picture. And in real life, they were objects that are the same size. So let's say that they are, in real life, they're a Rubbermaid tote, right? So you have a Rubbermaid tote in the front and you have a Rubbermaid tote farther along down the road. You know that the one that's farther along down the road should occupy the same amount of road as the one that's closer to us, if in fact these objects are the same size. But they aren't doing that. The one that's higher up is occupying more of the road. So our brain is saying the one on top must be objectively bigger because it's filling more of the road, right? It's higher in the road, so I know it's farther away. It even kind of looks darker, so it seems like it's less bright. So I'm going to say it's farther away, and it's filling more of the road. The linear perspective is showing me that, so it must be bigger. So when I activate this, and you see that they are in fact exactly the same size. And I found that if I move that bottom one up past the top one, so it actually is covering the linear perspective of the road, it allows you to really see that they are in fact the same size. So now you can see these are exactly equal. You realize that your brain is making a correction as you look at these two things, and it is taking these monocular cues into account and drawing the wrong conclusion that the one on top is farther away, yet it looks bigger. It is filling more of the road, so the linear perspective is giving us that impression that it's a larger object. And so our brain is saying farther away, looks bigger, it is bigger. The truth of the matter is, in reality, the image that's being cast by each of these rectangles is exactly the same size on your retina. So the fact that the one on the top looks bigger is completely and exclusively due to the fact that your brain is taking the context into consideration. I guess if I was smarter, I wasn't, I would have taken the image away and let you see it without that. That would have been smart. Let me try that real quick. Let's go. If you guys don't know how to do a lot with PowerPoints, I'll give you a little hint on how to make things disappear, right? So let's see if that works. So make it move like that. Take that away. It's not really as dramatic as one might hope because of the movement, so I'm going to take that away. All right, so now let's go. Here we are. Here are our two rectangles. And then take away the image. Now suddenly all of those cues went away, and now you clearly can see these are exactly the same size rectangle. I didn't do anything else. It really just shows you how much your brain is taking the context into consideration when all these monocular cues when judging distance, when you're well beyond the usefulness of the binocular cues, which is a lot of distance. We have to rely on something other than the binocular cues. So hopefully I've made a really good case that you rely on these cues a lot and have made you very, very interested and curious about it. And all of you who have taken art class, you're like, I know, we learned this in art class. But for those of us who haven't taken art class, it's like, wow, this is really interesting. So anyway, all right, well, I will see you in the next chapter, and hopefully you enjoyed my little animations. All right, see you next time.